Hi, everybody. Welcome to Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's get a quick take on a new ad campaign reminding pot users to consume edibles responsibly. The ad is in response to New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd, who wrote about an 8-hour hallucinatory experience she had after eating a marijuana-infused chocolate bar during a vacation in Colorado recently. Patty Calhoun from Westward, reportedly Dowd loves the billboard. What do you think of it? Do you think it'll be effective?
Well, against her, yes. What is not to love about this wonderful billboard? First of all, it is not Mason Tvert in a toga, which is what he did when he was protesting outside the governor's recently. The only thing that could be better is if it was Maureen Dowd in one of those lab rat cages. If we can pay $2 million, I bet we could get her here as some kind of fundraiser, because that campaign, the Don't Be a Lab Rat, pales in comparison to this. This is a far better use of somebody's money.
David Kopel for the Independence Institute and DU Law School. What do you think of the new billboard?
Well, among other things, brilliant, because it's getting an enormous amount of earned media, and the amount of people who will hear about it is far larger than the number who will actually see it. It also says the right thing, because, you know, think of when, say, gin was re-legalized in England, and people said, oh, I drink this much beer, so maybe I'll have just this much gin. Well, one's a lot more potent than the other, and so people do, like Dowd, sometimes consume way more of an edible than they should. The fortunate thing is, if you do make Maureen Dowd's mistake, it's not going to kill you. You know, unlike drinking too much alcohol, you know, you drink a bottle of tequila for some reason, that'll be fatal. You eat too many edibles, you may ruin your weekend and have bad feelings, and your heart will be racing too fast, but it will ultimately be harmless.
Who knows what kind of hallucinations would come around this table. Eric Sondren, political analyst. Do you think this is an effective campaign? We'll probably see more something like this?
Sure, any campaign that gets that kind of attention, you're going to see more of it. I guess I differ with David a little bit. It may not kill you, but it may kill someone, and in some cases it may kill you. We have the example up in Wyoming of somebody who wigged out, hallucinating, and I believe jumped off a building. Obviously, we had that incredibly sad case down in Observatory Park of the guy shooting his wife. So there is an issue with edibles in the whole marijuana business. It's probably the one most screaming out for some degree of regulation or some fix. What I find most interesting about this billboard is it's not put out by the critics. It's put out by the industry, and it's a sign when you're doing billboards like drink responsibly, you know, what the alcohol industry is doing that, or now consume responsibly for the marijuana industry. It's a sign of an industry that's been legitimized and is mainstream, or at least wants to be legitimized and wants to be mainstream.
Vic Vela from Colorado Community Media, wrap it up for us.
Well, and Patty's absolutely right. This billboard is just priceless. You have this Maureen Dowd-looking woman just covering her face, completely distraught, as if she was just subjected to another Mark Udall, Corey Gardner birth control ad or something. But, I mean, and who could blame her? But, you know, I don't really have much sympathy for Maureen Dowd here. I mean, yeah, we should probably put labels on this stuff. It's probably a good idea. But, I mean, what are you, 5 years old? I mean, if you're eating something that you know has drugs in it, and you know you haven't done it before, you should probably go easy on it. I mean, to David's point, you don't go into a liquor store, buy a bottle of scotch, and it says, you know, maybe you should take a few shots first before consuming the entire bottle. Right. I mean, and you don't get, you know, LSD from the kid at the Fish concert, you know, and he says, hey, man, you may want to slow down on this stuff, bro.
Slow down on this stuff, bro, indeed. Yeah. Let's get to it. National polling of Colorado's races for governor and the U.S. Senate varied wildly this week. A Quinnipiac University poll showed Bob O'Prey with a 10-point lead and Corey Gardner with an 8-point lead. However, USA Today polls showed John Hickenlooper and Mark Udall both up by 2 points, and other polls all over the place. Patty, this has become the headline this week of the race, not anyone's stance on a particular issue. As you look at these poll results, what did you think?
Well, I could say 2 words, which are Eric Cantor. Let's remember how he was polling, and he is no longer going back to Congress. So at this point, I would like us to be talking a lot less about polling and the different ways the polls were conducted and what was fair and what wasn't fair, and start talking about the issues, because there are clear differences between these candidates. For example, today we are hearing that the unemployment rate in Colorado is down to 5.1, which is a great number to talk about. Is it solid? Bob Prey would probably have something to say about that, but we're not hearing anything about what the candidates have to talk about. The only thing we know from these polls is these are all competitive races. And so these candidates are going to have to get out there and tell us what their positions are and do a very, very good job for the next month if they want to win. The other interesting thing is that if you believe the Quinnipiac poll, that Steve Shogan is polling at 8% as an independent in the Senate race. And if there really is as much in play on those unaffiliated voters, you could lose a race just because you could lose someone, 2 third-party candidates. You could lose votes. And I think that's something people are going to be paying a lot of attention to. I don't know if anyone's going to waste their $2 million from the Democratic governors or their $1.5 million from the Republican governors to attack a third-party candidate, but they're going to be paying more attention to those people.
David, we've heard them campaigns. They talked about the details of each poll, if they're asking too many of this kind of person or what kind of questions. Is there really that much value get into this kind of detail in a September poll? Does it really change the momentum when you see numbers like this?
Oh, I think it does affect the momentum because regardless of what experienced campaign professionals may or may not pay that much attention, but the volunteers and the potential donors certainly follow that. So that it is a morale problem for the Udall and Hickenlooper side. Now, I will say that every time there is a new poll, both sides find that this new poll, whether it's we're down 5, it's tied, we're up 6, whatever, is a new and urgently compelling reason why you should give money to the candidate.
That's very true.
You know, polling averages, what actually works pretty well is the Real Clear Politics website and their averages of the polls. Now that doesn't, but we're a month, people haven't started voting yet. If you look at their pre-election averages, like from the week before, the average almost always calls statewide races correctly. The other thing that even if let's say the Quinnipiac accurately reflects the electorate right now, if the election were held today, elections in Colorado aren't held on one day. And the Democratic model is clearly to replicate, and they have a lot of resources to do it, and they're doing the right thing of setting up, is to replicate the Obama success in 2012 of have an organization that will take your marginal voters and just pester them incessantly till they put in the mail ballot, and it's like, your mother's like nagging you to write the thank you note to Uncle Joe, and after the 8th time, it's easier just to write Uncle Joe a freaking thank you note than it is for your mother to keep bothering you, and that's what they're going to do to their marginal voters, and that led to success in 2012.
Eric, you have analyzed a lot of campaigns, a lot of stuff here. What do you do with these numbers? Do you just throw them out because they're so different, or is there some meat there?
Oh, so much to talk about here. There's a shock value to these polls. Both, I think Patty and David referenced this, particularly the first day's story. I think the second day's story, when you saw that not only did it have Beaupre up by 10, but it had Gardner up by 8, I think that called it into even a little more question. But that first day story, there was a shock value to it to both Democrats and Republicans. All of a sudden, Republicans wake up and say, we have a shot here. We may be able to win this. Let me write my check. Let me go walk a precinct, whatever. And Democrats wake up and say, this thing is in serious jeopardy. We could lose the governor's chair. So there was shock value to that. I regard it as something of an outlier poll. Who knows where this exact number is? But whether it's David's reference to Real Clear Politics or whatever, that is the right idea. You have to aggregate all the polls. No more would you, if you were a pollster, call one person in the state of Colorado and say, who are you going to vote for? And then make sweeping generalizations on which way the state is going based on that one phone call. Then I think you should rely on one poll and make sweeping generalizations. You've got to look at the whole aggregate of polls. It's like you do in other realms. You throw out the high, you throw out the low, and then the rest tends to cluster around probably where it is at. I think these are two very competitive races. I do think Hickenlooper is in some significant trouble here because his number seems to be a stuck number, and it's stuck well below the 50% threshold, closer to 43 or 45%. He has to figure out a way to get that number to grow. Last thing, Dominic, I think the difference in those two races right now tells me, unfortunately, regrettably, but realistically, the power of negative advertising. Because Cory Gardner has had a dump truck, a $10 or $15 million dump truck of negative ads run against him over the last few months. And Bob Beaupre hasn't had that yet. So his numbers haven't suffered like Gardner's numbers have suffered. Trust me, that dump truck is getting loaded up right now, and it's about to get dumped. But that hasn't been, it may be a little late to do it. The Udall people and the Democratic Senate types had the sense to do it back over the summer and early fall when voters' impressions were much more fluid and up for grabs.
Vic, ballots come out in about 3.5, 4 weeks. What should voters be expecting between now and then?
Oh, a dump truck, like Eric just said. I mean, he's absolutely right, and he knows polls better than I do. And a lot of times when you get into the numbers and get into the back and forth on these polls, a lot of it's inside baseball. The Hickenlooper campaign comes out after the Quinnipiac poll is out, and they said that the poll is fundamentally flawed because the results were based entirely on responders self-identifying their political party, which, so you could have people who are actually registered Republicans say, I'm an independent, because who really wants to admit they're a Democrat or Republican these days? And who could blame them? So, and then they say, look, the Republican Hickenlooper campaign, Republican Governors Association pulled its ads recently. Hickenlooper has a lot more money than Beaupre's, and they point to all these other polls that show him in the lead. So, look, I don't think anyone in his or her own Maureen Dowd-like pot brownie inspired dreams thinks this is a 10-point race in either direction. And I think it's going to be a very close race, and I think the polls on aggregate are showing that. And by the way, I think every pollster should have a Vegas odds maker doing these things, because there's no way those guys would let a point spread like that happen.
That's exactly true. The parents of a woman killed in the Aurora Theater shootings, the movie theater shootings, filed a lawsuit on Tuesday against several companies that sold ammunition and supplies to the shooter. The suit asked that the companies halt sales until they adjust their screening procedures. David, many legal experts came out this week and said that this case doesn't have a whole lot of odds to actually go through because there's a lot of different details. You are our legal expert at the table. What do you think?
One challenge that the plaintiffs have in this is causation. The killer in Aurora bought guns in gun stores in person and went through the background check after showing photo ID that he really was who he was. He also bought ammunition and other supplies by mail order. For mail order ammunition, you have to send your a copy of your driver's license to show that you're the right age, but there's no further background check. But the question is, what exactly are these online stores supposed to do in these lawful sales? They have no legal ability to do these background checks, which by law are restricted to the actual sale of firearms. But even if they had, he would have passed. So exactly what did they do? Anything you say they should have done, the highest level would be up to the level of if they were actually selling a gun. And what difference would it have made if he was able to pass background checks, buying stuff in person here in Colorado? This tells me that the Brady Center, which is the DC organization that's doing the suit, is doing fairly well financially these days because they are running straight into the teeth of a 2000 Colorado statute, which not only outlaws these kinds of suits, these tort suits, but actually provides for the mandatory award of attorney's fees to the ammunition company that got sued. Now, I'm sure they have some theory about why that doesn't apply, and it must be an extremely clever one because it's not one you can see obviously from the statute. And then on top of that, there's the state statute outlawing these kind of suits. There's a 2005 federal Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, which, using different language, prohibits these kinds of suits in state and federal court. So you've got two prohibitions with slightly different wording, which therefore makes their cumulative things, kind of lawsuits they prohibit, all the larger. So it's, I would say it shows a lot of gumption on the part of the plaintiffs, and I'll be curious to see what theories they've invented to get around these challenges.
Eric, do you think this will do less in a court of law and more in the court of public opinion?
Perhaps haven't thought about it through that angle. I do think in the court of law it is a tough lift. It's a heavy lift for a lot of the reasons David, as the attorney at this table, has laid out. Different people process grief in different ways, and we can't put ourselves in the shoes of those parents who lost their daughter. But this is, unfortunately and regrettably, increasingly the American way, is to process grief by finding somebody to sue. There always has to be somebody to blame, and somebody with a deep pocket to blame, as opposed to a crazy individual doing inexplicable, hideous, heinous things. It seems to be very difficult to just write it off to that kind of lunacy. And instead, you want to turn it into a legal issue or a political issue or some kind of a fight. And we tend to fight things out with trial lawyers through the tort system. I think that's unfortunate. I keep flashing back. It's got to be 15 years ago now to the parents up in Greeley who lost a daughter to, I think it was E. coli through Odwalla. And they had probably an open and shut case against Odwalla, and they decided not to sue Odwalla and instead entered into a settlement where they built a park in this girl's name. And those kinds of indications or examples of grace and not going through the tort system are too few and far between.
Vic, what do you think?
And David's the expert here in terms of law. I mean, one of the things from learning about the lawsuit is that the folks who don't think it's that great of an idea point to a law passed by Congress which shields the gun industry from this type of litigation. But the lawyer for the plaintiffs says that they're not necessarily, it doesn't really apply because they're not dealing with licensed gun dealers. These guys just selling stuff over the internet, which is what James Holmes bought a lot of his stuff from. But I mean, the stuff he bought online is just staggering. I mean, tear gas grenades, over 2,000 rounds of .40 caliber ammunition, bulletproof protection. I mean, there's a lot more. But anytime you talk about guns, especially in Colorado, it's a very sensitive subject. And it's an issue that, frankly, a lot of folks don't want to deal with. We saw after Sandy Hook and we saw after the Aurora Theater shooting, Colorado was just one of a handful of states to actually take up gun control legislation and actually pass it. And of course, it cost a few Democratic seats in the Senate because of it.
Right. Patty, wrap it up for us.
Well, these lawsuits are going to still be sideshows to the main circus that's coming our way. So it is not just this gun case where it's very hard to see where they're going to get it very far, given Colorado law right now and the fact that these were purchased legally. We have the case against the theater itself, and it's hard to know how the theater would have been able to stop this. But the real show is coming in December because it looks like the trial of James Holmes will go on then. Start then with jury selection, and it will go for many, many months. So finally, we'll probably have the long-delayed death penalty discussion in Colorado.
A lot of conversations to be determined. Colorado's new law intended to provide driver's licenses to illegal immigrants is under more scrutiny this week. Advocacy groups are upset over state fiscal reports that the program is grossly underfunded. The nonpartisan Legislative Council provided figures that have turned out to be half of the actual demand. Eric, this problem only gets worse, but at this point now you can point back to the legislature, and even the early parts of the bill wanted more funding, and it got only half of the funding it apparently needed. Does this come back to Democratic legislators?
Well, I think it comes back on a lot of people, but it starts with the governor. The governor is the one who most people hold accountable for administering the law. There's a lot of Latino, in particular, Latino upset with John Hickenlooper right now around this issue. If John Hickenlooper, as if he didn't need more political problems right now, this has turned into a significant issue within his own base vote that he is wrestling with at the moment. And as I indicated, it's one he doesn't need. This was largely predictable, whether that should have been done in the legislature with funding or whatever, but people knew this was coming down the road. It is hard to believe that there are administrative problems at the DMV or that everything's not running smoothly there, but I know that one is a particular shocker. And you really have a political divide here among Democrats and Latinos in particular who want this thing done right and don't think it's done right or being funded properly, and Republicans on the other side who really question whether we should be doing this at all.
Vic, is this going to grow arms and legs before the election, or do you think most politicians on either side of the aisle want to deal with this later?
I really don't know, but Eric's right. Immigrant groups are not happy about this. We already saw folks held protests about it, and the last thing you want in an election where you're worried about people showing up to begin with without a big presidential name at the top of the ticket is for these folks to just stay home on election night. And I don't know if that's going to happen. We'll see. And maybe they'll address it. But the rollout of this immigration driver's license thing, makes the folks behind the Obamacare website look and go like, geez, these guys are bad. I mean, the long lines for these licenses, it starts out, and then there was the news from last week where there's more than 500 regular driver's licenses sent out. Instead of the ones that denote them immigration status. And then now the Legislative Council is saying that they didn't, afford enough money, or it was the demand exceeded what they thought. So I don't know how this is going to play out politically, but this is just not a good thing, and it's probably something that's got to be fixed here in the next legislative session.
Patty, do you think someone will come out as a legislator to say, yes, we are going to fix this to maybe help tamp down the damage?
Oh, I think they'll wait till after November because no one wants to bring a lot of attention to this. Whether or not you agree with the program, I think everyone would agree once it's been instituted, it should at least work. Vic's point about those 500 licenses that went through is really one of the greatest bad problems here. Because here you would say, oh, these guys can't vote for Hickenlooper anyway because they are not citizens, except that 500 of them got licenses that would work if you went in to register to vote. So that was one snafu, that you couldn't figure out how many people you would need and how long it would take for them to get the licenses, when any one of us who've ever been to the DMV could tell you 10 times longer than you think. And on top of that, I was astonished to realize that the booklet for getting your driver's license wasn't in Spanish to begin with. You can't go into a bathroom and not be told how to wash your hands in Spanish. And I can't believe in Colorado that didn't already exist, but someone should have figured out that that would take a little time too.
David, wrap it up for us.
It is interesting how the Democratic and Republican establishments in Colorado have both wanted to not make this an issue. I heard New Mexico Governor Susana Martinez speak earlier this week in Santa Fe, and she is running for re-election very vigorously on the platform of repealing New Mexico's similar law, because she says it has a huge amount of people who come in with forged documents of purported utility bills or whatever, and then you get a New Mexico driver's license under a false name, which then becomes a breeder document for all kinds of identity fraud going on. In Oregon, when the legislature passed it, the sheriffs have led a plan to put it on the ballot and have repeal of the driver's license program for illegal aliens on the ballot there. And at least according to their accounts of the polling, the public overwhelmingly supports repeal of that Oregon statute.
Well, it's time for our favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week. As always, Patty, start us off.
Well, I'm going to return to a topic we will be talking about for the rest of our lives, legalized marijuana. And it's not just the Maureen Dowd ad, which you have to love, but the fact that right now the DPD in a podcast is dealing with the new Halloween scare rumor that people are going to find a pot in their Halloween candy. Now, anyone who is passing that rumor has never gone and bought a $20 chocolate bar. This is just as stupid as every other Halloween rumor that we've heard about for decades, and the DPD does not need to be dealing with it.
David.
A quarter century ago, President George H.W. Bush very cynically pushed for a constitutional amendment to limit the First Amendment because of flag burning. And now we see a similar, just base pandering on his part. Fortunately, never happened. Now we see, unfortunately, Senators Udall and Bennett have voted for a similar thing to create another exception to the First Amendment, this one on limiting political speech. Again, pandering to the base and really not. That's something you shouldn't do when it comes to the Constitution, especially the First Amendment.
Eric.
Let's go to the U.S. Senate race in Colorado. Both sides have filed ethics complaints against the other guy. Those complaints ought to be reserved for when there are real ethical lapses, not just political gotcha about the most incredibly minor stuff. The state Democratic Party has a complaint about Cory Gardner. A group called Compass Colorado, which is a Republican front, has a complaint about Mark Udall. This is totally crying wolf. And one of these days, there's going to be somebody who's truly ethically challenged that you want to file a complaint about, but we have so politicized that process, it's not going to be taken seriously.
Vic.
It's got to be the NFL. Again, I mean, it reads like a police blotter these days. It's just getting ridiculous. And pretty soon, these teams are going to start looking like the bad guys in The Longest Yard movie. I mean, they're going to have to. The nice thing, it'll save taxpayer dollars because they could just play all their games in prison yards.
Now it's time to say something nice about somebody. Patty?
This weekend is the 3rd annual Pedal the Plains, a great time to get out and see eastern Colorado. And while you do, go stop at the Wonderview Tower, 100 miles east of Denver, where they're auctioning off all the contents of that incredible roadside attraction.
David.
Weld County leading the nation in job growth, and also Adams County doing pretty well in that regard by properly and responsibly using their natural resources.
Eric.
Love Pedal the Plains, but separately than that, there have been number of articles recently, proposals to redevelop the Sun Valley neighborhood of Denver, one of the most impoverished neighborhoods in the city. It's just south of the Broncos Stadium, and turn it into a sustainable, eco kind of development. I mean, these are impoverished kids who live among nothing but asphalt and concrete, and to be able to introduce some natural elements there would be huge.
Vic.
Elton John, welcome to Denver tomorrow. Going to the Pepsi Center, and when you think of AIDS charities and think of charity in general, you think of Elton John and you think of Captain Fantastic, which is one of the best albums of all time.
Hear, hear. That's all the time we have tonight. Thanks for tuning in. We want to tell you about 2 special events happening soon. Next Wednesday, September 24th at 7 p.m. is the premiere of Both Sides of the Story, our new high school debate series. 2 very talented high school students will tackle both sides of Proposition 105, the ballot proposal that would mandate labeling of genetically modified foods. You won't want to miss it. Also, Colorado Inside Out is taking our act on the road. That's right. Friday night, October 6:30 p.m. and at 7 o'clock, we'll go through the week's events and take live questions from the audience. The event is free, but seats are limited, so go to cpt12.org for details. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Right now we are setting our lights for Colorado Inside Out, our Friday show. Every person around the table gets a key light, a fill light, and a backlight.
So the key light is at an angle on someone's face, and it's their main light. It gives us most of the brightness and the luminance of their face, and it's usually like at an angle, so it'd be like hitting me at this side of the angle. When you light someone with the key light, you're going to create shadows on the opposite side. So then we use a fill light to light the other side of their face. And the goal of the fill light is to be not as bright as the key, so you have a little bit of shadow, and keep it from being too flat.
Which adds up to about 1,500 watts worth of light on everybody's heads. And we're just aiming the lights for the show, making sure everything looks good.
And then the last light is the backlight, and the goal for the backlight is to create a rim around the shoulders and the head to separate the person from the background. So the backlight, when it's done right, we should have a halo or a rim light around the back of the person to separate them from the backdrop.
We've got every position around the table lit. That's 16 lights for all the people, and now we're going to light the backgrounds and the rest of the set.
We have backdrop lights, which just give us a little something in the background to keep it from being totally dark and black. One of the biggest challenges for lights here is we have people sitting really close to each other. So when you're trying to do a key and a fill on one person, we're going to get spill onto the person sitting next to them. So we have to try and work with getting the lights even and working on getting just a little bit of shadow, but not a whole lot of shadow on their face. If we get started late, we will have to just start the show, and the EIC will have to work while we're in the show, adjusting the lights and the cameras to tweak them that last couple notches to get them to look the best that they can. Kind of having funny stuff.